make sure they're muted, and it does look like everybody is. So welcome to our talk on repairing and maintaining old wooden boats. In the blurb, it mentions that we would be talking about the restoration of Pimpernel, which we shall be doing a bit, but because that was a restoration rather than a renovation, we didn't do as much to the boat as you might think. So we're going to use examples from the other boats that we've worked on to demonstrate this.
And I'm just trying to work out how to share the screen. Ah, there it is. Okay.
Right, we'll just get Hugh going with the technology.
You should now be looking at a picture of an old boat.
That's it. We thought if you could put questions either into the chat, or if we've got time at the end to take questions in live time and a bit of discussion, we can do that as well. But if you type questions into chat, then at least we can keep a tally of how we're going. But I'll run through rather than having questions en route. It would be better not to do that. So projects that we've completed to date, what we're basing our talk on. Hugh renovated this boat. Golly, it must be 10 years ago.
It is 10 years ago, yes.
Yeah. Which was unfortunately allowed to get in a very, very bad state by its previous owner, to the extent that when we
it was so bad I didn't take a photograph of it before.
Well, no, we didn't realise then how
best I could do.
Might be.
That is the before photograph, but not of the whole boat.
No. Even people think that's the finished boat. So you can see we took it from a pretty ropey state to something, or Hugh took it from something that was a very ropey state to something that was truly beautiful. And there it is sailing. And the other boat, which we shall feature quite a lot of, is my own. Now mine, though it doesn't look too bad in this shot, it's clearly very dated, and I'll be talking more about centreboards and centreboard cases. That had got really very bad in certain places. And it was because Hugh had really practiced beforehand on his own boat that I asked him to help me with mine. So all my experience, I must take my hat off to Hugh for helping me with. Have we got a picture of it when it was finished, Hugh? Yes, there it is when it was finished, and that's about 4 or 5 years ago.
And in the background, you see the real reason that Steve asked me to help. It's not because I knew anything, it's just because I have a fairly large garage.
Yes. No, Hugh knows a lot. Right, so the other boat, of course, which has been in the media quite a lot, the GP14 media, is Pimpernel #2, and we took that one on board and dealt with that one. But as I've already said, it wasn't a complete start again type rebuild. That was very much a case of trying to preserve historic fabric and return the boat to its original specification. So some general guidance before you start. I think the first thing is that you have to decide what you're aiming at. And I mean, this is quite pertinent to what I've just been saying. If you've got a boat which isn't of any great significance, it's just an old GP14, and you want to make it nice, you can do what Hugh and I have done, I would suggest, which is to redeck it if it needs redecking, and repair it where it needs repairing, without really worrying too much about trying to retain historic fabric, because it's probably not a boat of any great significance. So you can see on mine, I've taken out one of the seat rails on each side. We've put floor panels in instead of floorboards. It's been redecked, and you'll see later on that we've done a lot of work on the bottom. We put a new transom in, etc. And effectively, that's what Hugh did with his. A little bit less, because Hugh didn't change the centreboard case. But if you've got a boat like #2, which is a boat of some significance, you probably want to try and retain as much of the original boat as you can, and that's a rather different kettle of fish. Skill levels required. You don't need to be hugely skilled. You need to have a friend who is quite skilled, and that's where Hugh came in for me, and certainly somebody who's practiced beforehand and knows what they're doing and what not to do. And you need the right tools for the job. Again, you don't need to have a really fancy toolkit, but you do want to make sure you've got the right ones. And something that Hugh tipped me off with, and it's a really useful tip, is if you're removing decks or large sections of hull skin, using something like a router can be really handy, because instead of just trying to chisel the decks off, which can cause all sorts of damage to the frames, if you route at the correct depth across the top of each frame, the bits in between just fall out, and you're left with a nice clean frame top to fix your new decking to, or your new hull skin to. So it's those sort of tips that are worth having. You don't need to be a super qualified joiner to tackle this sort of stuff. The right materials also, you get the right adhesives, and there are quite a bit, so it's worth doing it as well as you possibly can. So I would recommend using something like Robin's timber for any plywood that's going to be varnished and seen. And in fact, Robin's will supply you some lesser plywoods for stuff painted as well. But the stuff that's going to be varnished, it is expensive, but as you've seen from the pictures, they do look really nice when you're finished. And use the correct epoxy adhesives for sticking it together. We use West Epoxy on ours, there are others. And another product that we've used a fair bit in for consolidating the older and rather softer plywoods is Eposeal. Again, I guess other consolidants are probably available, but Gurit Eposeal is the one we've used. It has one disadvantage, that it is not good with UV, so best not to use it on a deck. But if you've got your hull skins stripped back and ready to paint, but they're quite spongy when they're old. Number 2 was particularly like that. 3 or 4 coats of Eposeal really does firm them, make them nice and hard again, crisp as it were. Don't be frightened, because as you'll see in a minute, particularly when we look at the work on the hull skin, the GP14 has an awful lot of wood in it, the Series 1 boat. It was probably pretty much over-designed, so there's an awful lot to go at. But one thing I would say, though, is remember the adage, try and make it better before you make it worse. So if you've got a really ropey boat and you're going to do, let's say, a centerboard case removal, before you turn the boat over to do that, I would be inclined to stiffen it a bit. We'll come on to this in a minute when we do centerboard removal, so you'll see what I'm on about more. But we put some struts inside the hull before we did anything too radical in the way of chopping bits out and then rolling the boat over. Because once you chop quite a lot of stuff out, an old hull could get a bit flexible. So we thought that was prudent. So it's always worth bearing that in mind before you step to and start stripping decks off, for example, and then thinking, oh, I want to turn it over, I'll just turn it over now. You don't want to end up with just a stick of bits that you're trying to move around your workshop. So again, just phase your work, stage your work, so that you're putting stuff back, but take more off if you can. Do also be aware that if you're dealing with a very old boat, it's going to be stuck together with Cascamite adhesive, which after about 25 years has probably lost most of its stiction, and it's screwed together with masses and masses of brass screws. But when you try and take them out, you'll find many of them just crumble away. So the truth is that a boat that's about 60 or 70 years old is probably staying together by force of habit, not a lot else. So again, that's another reason for putting a bit of stiffness back into the boat with some temporary strutting before you give it any severe traumas. I think that's about where I'm going to stop on the preamble chat, and I'm going to pass you on to Hugh now, who will tell you about the work that we did on the hull skins. Over to Hugh.
Thank you, Steve. You should all be seeing a picture of a detail of a hole in the bottom of a boat. If you can't see that, send us a message through the chat. This is just a few pictures and a bit of an account of some work I did on my boat. The boat's name is, well, she's known to her friends as Daffodil. That's not her real name, but that's what she's known as. When I took pity on this boat, it was owned by another member of the same of my club. It had been languishing for a while, and I'd made him an offer that he could have refused it, but he didn't. I got the boat for almost nothing. Then Steve stuck his finger through the bottom. That is the hole that Steve's finger made. It was in really pretty poor shape in certain places. This isn't something we're going to be talking about in a great deal today, but this particular picture shows the mast step on the GP14, which is an area that's really prone to rotting and getting in a bad way. So some of the pictures I'll show you do actually show the mast step conversion to the new style, which is what I did because of this. But I'm going to be focusing on the hull itself and a little bit on the decks and the transom. So that's where we started. The rot, of course, also extends to the frames, so I had to replace some frames. That's looking forward. On the right-hand side there is the centerboard case. That's frame number 2, for those who know their frame numbers in the GP14, with what used to be a drain hole in it, which is now a rather ugly-looking thing. So you just cut it out, get rid of it, chop it out, be brave, make big holes. So that's from the inside, everything just cut out, and that's the same stage in the process from the outside. This is just one of the many holes that I patched in my boat. You can see the extent of the rot in the frame there as well, and the hog is quite rotten. And you can see we've just taken out a section of the keel. Doesn't matter, just take it out. You can then replace it. The epoxy glue that you're going to be putting it back together with is so strong that with a little slopey joint there, it's going to be as good as the wood. That's Steve's boat with slightly more holes in it. I seem to have lost the picture of Steve sticking his head out through the hole. That would have been a nice one to show you. But again, just attack it, take all the rotten wood out. You could, of course, take the whole hull skin off. In neither of these projects did we do that. We just confined ourselves to making big holes and then patching them up. And I guess which one you do depends on the ratio of rotten bits to sound bits. But we reckoned in each of these cases there was enough sound wood to retain, and so we didn't have to reshape the whole thing. We just had to put in some patches. At this stage, the holes have been cut with square edges, vertical edges, but then you slope them. You create what's called a scarf joint, sloping the edges. And I think on this one, this is back to my boat here. On this one, I just used a rasp as far as I can remember. Just did it by hand, did it by eye, made it sort of shallow slope. And then you can see at the top left there, the piece that's going to go in with a similar slope on it. Doesn't have to be very accurate. In fact, the more pits, hollows, and imperfections in it, the better in some ways, because that's more, provides a greater surface area for the epoxy glue to grab hold of. And any little voids will be filled by the epoxy. So we told ourselves anyway that doing it badly was actually a good thing. So no precision, perfect, smooth joints, nice rough ones which fit approximately is what we went for. That was the aim. There's another view. I think that's a slightly smarter one, that hole. The patch about to be fitted in. You can see there's all sorts of old holes here from, I forget what those holes were for. I have no idea.
That was, yeah, I'll just interrupt you. That's actually number 2, and that's
Oh,
where
is
those
it?
horrible
Yes.
plastic bailers in, which were.
That's what that is, of course. Yes.
So we were returning number 2 to her original spec. So plastic bailers came out. Of course, they didn't have bailers originally, so we filled the holes in.
Yes, that is, of course, what that is. But of course, the function of those holes now is to provide extra keying surface for the epoxy glue. So, again, you can argue that it's a good thing to have extra holes in there. And all you end up with on the inside of the boat, of course, is a few little round blobs of epoxy which you sand down and nobody notices them. So the scarf joint around the edge of the patch, that's another one. That's back to my boat, I think. And you can see the Robbins timber here, the logo of Robbins timber. We're not on commission from Robbins of Bristol, but they do seem to sell the best marine ply. Certainly the only stuff I've ever used. Do not, under any account, go to B&Q or similar hardware shop and buy what is alleged to be waterproof ply or even marine ply from sources you don't know. Here, the piece hasn't quite yet been finished so that it'll sit nicely in the hole. I think it looks a little bit proud. So I'm going to have to take a little bit more off the edges there just to make sure it bends down in and goes and ends up flush with the surface. It's better to have it a little bit too low, a little bit down, than it is to have it a bit proud. If it's proud, you're going to inevitably have those, you can't get rid of those edges. They're going to be there all the time, however much you smooth them out. But if it's down, it dips down a little bit, you can always fill with a very thin skim of epoxy. You can fill the over the patch, make it fair it in with the rest of the hull. And I think that is showing, that's back to, no, that's daffodil again. That's, sorry, no, I mean, that's sea willow, Steve's boat.
Yeah, that's fine.
Getting confused here. They were both yellow, you see, so patches are done. Patch, there's more patches you can't see there. And that's pretty much it. As Steve mentioned, when it comes to cutting out over a frame, we found a router was a very good trick. Don't cut away apart. You leave in what's not on the frame, and you use that as a platform router on, and route to the required depth, whatever it is, 5 mil or 6 mil, whatever. 5 mil, isn't it? The hull of the GP14, and the hulls, the skin surrounding the frame will stay there just long enough for you to route out over the frame, and then the whole thing collapses. But by that time, you've routed out precisely to the depth of the frame. When you glue them in, you need to weigh them down somehow. We just tended to use either weights or combinations of weights and a slightly bendy stick against the ceiling, and pushing down on the patch, on the edges of the patch, to hold it in position while the glue sets.
That was our most commonly used system, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, I have a whole collection of
sticks up the
sticks
ceiling, sprung into place.
Yep. So this was the picture which showed routing out over the frames. Actually, that's a new frame, but you could imagine that as an old frame, and running the router over that before you get rid of this bit and this bit of the hull skin. My hog there isn't in terribly good shape, but I actually decided not to replace the hog. I think in hindsight, I might have done better to replace the hog. I just let it be and then poured a load of epoxy and used some little bits of wood to patch it up from the inside after I'd mended the hull. It's good enough, the epoxy is so strong, but a better job might have been done by taking out a section of the hog as well. And that's the end result of that particular patch, which I started showing you from the inside. You can see here how I've also replaced a section of frame. That was quite tricky. It's on both sides, here and here. And it's tricky because the underside of the frame, where it touches the hull skin, is both sloping this way and sloping that way. It's quite a complicated angle to work out, lots of trial and error to do precisely right. That's the mast step conversion, which I mentioned, which we're not really going to be talking about. But if you're doing anything around this area on a GP14, it is well worth doing that. Basically involves strengthening, putting a spine in, and then bridging across onto the front of the centerboard case, and chopping 10 centimeters off the bottom of your mast, and off you go. That's roughly it anyway. There are plans available from the association. Another view of the same thing, the finished job of that particular part of the hull. You can see I've also taken the decks off. We're not going to talk about replacing the decks specifically, although it's much the same really as replacing the hull. Although
Hugh, that does demonstrate, Hugh, very, very well that by using the router to get rid of the decks, how clean the frames are. There's no splitting or damage or anything that you probably
if you try and prise the the skin off the frames here with a chisel and hammer or something, you're going to make a real mess of it. Some of it's going to flake off, some of it's going to splinter away, some of it's going to be left behind, and so on. But just the router and planning your campaign so that you route over here, then you route over here, then you route over here, and so on. And then that bit falls in because you've chopped off the branch you're standing on. But it does work. The other thing I want to talk about was replacing the transom, and the reason I want to talk about this is because I'm particularly proud of how we did it. Sounds quite challenging, and actually it was quite challenging. You can see immediately on this is my boat, you can see immediately why I needed to replace the transom, because it's not an official GP14 transom. I do not know who put that transom in. You're not supposed to have square holes. I don't know what they're there for. They are absolutely no use at that height anyway. So I needed to put a proper transom in that actually adhered to class rules apart from anything else. What I've done at this stage is I've routed out to, I forget what depth. If I'm using 6mm ply for the new transom, for example, I route out to 6mm depth around the edge, being extremely careful not to damage the hull skin. That was quite challenging. Although later, when we came to Steve's boat, we came up with another way of doing it, where it didn't matter if we damaged the hull skin as well. I'll mention that in a moment. So first step, route out a bit around the edge, then attack it with a saw. And you are left with the remnant of a frame of the transom around there, having chopped out the pieces. Take the opportunity to clean up what needs cleaning up. I think this is Steve's boat again, and while you can get at it, just clean it up a bit. And then that's my boat with the transom removed, but left in just the thinnest sliver of material along the bottom to act as a something to glue the new transom to. On the sides here, there's actually a what do you call it? A beam up the corner of the boat. So in effect, I've taken away the transom and just left the support there. And then I'm going to just glue in a piece of plywood. Same from the inside. Here I'll just go back to the previous one. Just leaving a gap there for the drain holes to go through. I cut out a little bit of extra there. And then there's the new transom ready to go in. You can tell before I took the old one out. Slightly better adherence to class rules there. And that's the new transom in. Bit of trial and error, shaving a bit off here, shaving a bit off there in order to get it in, make it fit. And it takes time. It's a bit scary when you first take the router to it, and you're holding the router, of course, horizontally, which can be quite tough work. They're designed to be placed flat on a surface, but when you're doing it at 90 degrees, it was hard work. And taking care and putting some guide pieces in to make sure I didn't go where I didn't want to go, so on. That's the finished product. Just go back to the previous one. On Steve's boat, we had our cunning plan. I hope I'm not letting away any secrets here, am I, Steve? What we ended up doing was, because of the back of the hull skin was pretty ragged, we actually took off the back portion of the hull skin is outside the transom. Transom there, hull skin here, outside it. So you have that edge of plywood showing at the back of the boat. We actually took off an extra strip of the hull skin, used the router on the side of the boat and on the bottom of the boat, and took it back about 1 centimetre, and then put a tiny thin piece of plywood around the edge. So it looks as if it's the edge of the whole skin, but actually it's a separate piece of plywood stuck on at the back.
But the point I was making earlier about making it stronger before we make it weaker, we had got the new transom in and all glued up and effectively finished, and then we said, right, that looks a mess around the edge. Yeah, and it was quite straightforward actually to route back that amount, and it was only about 1/4 of an inch wide, the piece we glued in. But now when you stand and look at the stern of my boat, you think, oh, he's replaced both the bottom skin and the side skin of the hull. I haven't actually. That's just a complete con. And the interesting thing is, mine has the roundy chines, but at the transom I've got pointy chines, so I've got a very, very special boat there.
Yes, it was quite a lot of work to fair it in to make it change from rounded to pointed. That's my boat at a fairly finished stage. Put the new decks on. We're not going to talk about redecking in detail. And I think I'm now going to hand over to Steve to talk about.
Did you want to show us your bits of
Oh
wood,
yes, I've got
Hugh,
bits
first?
of wood, haven't I? Yes. Let me stop sharing. Just we've got some sample bits of wood here, which might be of interest to people. That's 2 bits of plywood joined to make a single piece of plywood, if you like. The scarf joint there, and the reciprocal, well, you can't see it, this reciprocal scarf on this bit. So that's just glued together and is extremely strong. There's no way that you're going to break that joint. If I bend it too far, what's going to break is not the joint, but the plywood. Just a random piece of 2 bits of ply, just glued together with epoxy. No joints, just together.
Just butted together.
And then just for fun, I don't know if you noticed that on my boat, the little triangular piece in front of the washboard slopes, and you have a little triangular piece. I did a sandwich of mostly sycamore with thin strips of mahogany in it, and you can see this is left over after I cut the triangle out. And then when we came to do Steve's boat, we thought we'd do the opposite. So I've got sycamore with mahogany detail, and Steve has mahogany with sycamore detail. Again, just sandwiches made of different woods, just glued together with epoxy. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Steve.
Right, I'm going to talk about. Now, I must do my screen share first. Oh, hello, where's it gone? Oh gosh. Right.
It's at the bottom, Steve.
Yes, I've got that. I'm trying to find my pictures. Oh, there, that's it. Thank you. Yes. Right, so let's start with, will that go larger? That's it. We should have. Looking for the function to move it sideways. Why won't it do that? This might be a pain. Right, anyway, I'll start with this one, and then if I struggle, you'll have to bear with me. I was looking for my arrow, which allows me to move seamlessly from one to the other. But it appears
Just open the slide you want to show, the picture you want to show us, Steve, and don't worry about the relative proportions of the screens. Okay,
well, this is the one I want to show you. I'm just wondering how to move on. Anyway, right, not to worry. This is my boat, and one of the major problems was the state of the centerboard case. If you just bear with me, I shall hopefully find you the next picture. Yeah, this is a bit slow again. It'll work.
I'm not seeing that full screen, Steve.
Thumbnails.
I'm just looking at thumbnails here.
Oh,
I think you
right.
need to. Is it just not a case of double clicking on the thumbnail?
That's got bigger now.
Not here, it hasn't.
All right.
I have. Oh.
Let me just see what I'm doing wrong. Let me go backwards. So they're still thumbnails, are they?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's see if I have observe set.
Let me go back into share screen again. No better?
Much better.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Better
right,
for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. What I'm just trying to work out is how I get to see my arrow to move the thing on. The next
scroll. Just scroll. Do you have a scroll button on your mouse?
I do.
Scroll downwards. One click. Scroll down.
Okay. Well, brilliant. Okay. Thank you, Hugh. Very good. Okay.
For some reason, the right and left arrows weren't working for me either.
No. Right. Sorry, folks. So we'll go on to the centerboard case. Right. One of the clues that you have a problem is you get all this black. Somebody.
And we could scramble a couple eggs. We could fry some bacon. I don't know if that's
Katrina,
overrated.
can you mute yourself? Or
Somebody not
you.
muted. Could they mute, please? Thank you. You'll see you get this black shading developing where the case meets the hog. This is a clear sign water is getting in and creeping up into the centerboard case. The way the centerboard case is joined to the hog on these early GPs is pretty crude. They're basically screwed through from below, and they sit on a mat, which is a sort of Oliver might be able to tell us later exactly what the mat is, but it looks as though it's some sort of Hessian mixed with putty. There's no glue connection. There's no rigid connection there at all. It's almost as though Jack Holt felt there needed to be some flexibility in that point. And over time, that mat dries out and then water starts to get in. And of course, what people do is what I did when I was first owner of this boat and didn't understand really the implications. You reach the fiberglass tape and you end up taping along the joint between the centerboard and the hog. And all that actually does is to entrap the water. It doesn't keep it out. It still gets in from within the slot. And it then just simply starts rising up in the centerboard case itself. And then you find this sort of thing happening. You can see there, look, there's my tape. So there we are, guilty as charged. And I found that water started to appear around this area. And so I thought, oh gosh, you know, and I still hadn't decided to do any major work on the boat at this point. This was before I really got probably at this point, Hugh's boat was just in progress. So I was beginning to think, oh, maybe we should do that with mine. But in the meantime, and you can see the sort of state of the problem, water gets in at the back of the centerboard case, creeps under here. So I was getting not only rot in the case, but also a little bit of problem developing in the hog. So it was pretty poor. Now then, so this job, only thing to do is to take the case out. Now this is actually number 2 we're looking at here, because the similar sort of things were starting on number 2, not quite as serious as mine, I have to say. The case wasn't too bad, but it did leak. The owner said it leaked very badly along here. And certainly you could wobble the case about as well. So it was absolutely clear that this joint, which I was telling you about, had failed. So the case needed to come out. You
can see that it's number 2. I hope you've all noticed the number engraved on the hog there.
There we are. Yeah, proof positive.
GP14 number 2.
Genuinely number
1950.
2. Yeah. When the GP is built, the decks go on one of the later things, and the problem is the case is obviously in by then, and the thwart is in by then, and then the decks go on. So if you want to take the case out, you've got to take the thwart out, but you can't get the thwart out with the decks in place. It just physically doesn't come out. It's a bit tricky. So the answer is to make a cut there underneath where a seat rail is, so that when you reassemble, it will never be seen. You only need cut one side because you can jiggle the other side free once the rails are out. So step 1, get the seat rails off. Step 2, make a neat, I may cut it on the angle when I cut it, so you've got a scarf to rejoin it. So that's the first thing to do. And then you're going to have to turn the boat over. But once this is taken out and the seat rails are out, the boat is potentially quite flexible. That's what I was trying to say earlier on when I was introducing this talk. So what we did actually, we just put a strut between there and its opposite side, just screwed it in place. So that it put some stiffness back in the boat before we put it on its side and started to roll it over. I think in the end we were probably being overcautious, but nevertheless, I thought it was a wise thing to do. All right, let's see if I can get the next picture. There we are. There it is. That was number 2, ready for turning over. Seats out, thwart gone. But all the material, all those items were perfectly salvageable and ready to put back. Interestingly, the seat rails have been giving trouble for some time. They do on GP14s, and they're not that well secured. And somebody had screwed them back in with steel screws. And an awful lot of the work I had was getting out rusting steel screws, would you believe? And they'd done the classic thing as well, just as a sideline. This one at this side, they put a really long steel screw in to try and hold things down and screwed it straight into the buoyancy bag and burst it. It's quite a common problem. The next thing is to get to the screws that actually hold the case in place. So to do that, you need to take the keel off, because you may find there are some long screws in the keel that go right through and into the case, but most of those holding the case will be found underneath the keel and in the hog. So I unscrewed the screws holding the hog, holding the keel down, and then just very carefully with a wide chisel, just ease the thing up. And because it's
that chisel is called Uncle Fred.
Yes, actually, no, that one is Uncle Fred, Hugh, to be
That's Uncle
perfectly
Fred,
honest,
isn't
but
it?
that technically, my Uncle Fred was a wagon builder. So he had some really big tools. I mean, his widest one, his widest chisel was very good for this job. Just going to have a quick sweep. But it came off very, very easily. Once it started to go, the Cascamite was offering very little resistance, and we were able to remove that section so it could be reused quite easily. Wasn't a problem at all.
But notice again, you just boldly cut through the
through
the keel. Doesn't matter if you gouge out a little bit of a saw cut in the plywood surrounding it. Doesn't matter. You're just going to fill it again with epoxy. It'll be stronger than it was before you start.
That's it. And I just popped that screw back in. That shows you where the screws were. Some of them we couldn't get out. I had to drill the heads off. They were really just impossible to get. The problem was that the heads have gone very crystalline and crumbly, and quite a few the head just decayed, and then made it quite awkward. But getting a drilling down carefully on the centre line of the screw, you can clean enough away whereby you can then remove the item you're trying to remove. Quite a lot of time was spent actually in very carefully drilling out remnants of screws in various different places on the boat. Right, and then once you've definitely got all the screws out, and they do take a bit of finding, you give the centerboard case a good old waggle, and suddenly it drops into your lap, and there it was, gone. I did struggle a bit to find all the screws. There was one which I think it was hiding underneath the hull skin, because the hull skin is, oh yes, that's right, it could have been, because I tell you what you're seeing here, that is hog. That is the feather edge of the hull skin, because the hull skin is glued to a tapered face on the side of the hog, and then planed off flat to give you a whole flat area to attach the keel. So can you see you've got sort of tapering to a feather edge hull skin? There's a bit of the hog revealed, and then the hull skin went to there and then restarted and a bit splintered off there. It's very, very thin at this point, but actually you look, there's a screw that was underneath the hull skin. So I did have to dig around a bit and find them. But don't be frightened to do it, because when you glue it all back together with good old West epoxy, it's incredibly strong. Right, so let's just go on. There it is, it's out. And for this boat, as it was number 2, we definitely wanted to retain this. So we stripped all the varnish off. We cramped up some very dodgy jointing at this end. We did let a bit in there where it was very black. We cut that out because it was completely spongy, and we let a piece in there. And it was then pretty much sound and ready to put back in, actually. It wasn't too bad. On my own boat, I went for a new centerboard case because it was lighter. My boat was 50 pounds overweight when we started on it, and the centerboard case weighs an absolute ton, particularly if it's got a lot of water in it. I remember on one occasion I was stripping some paint off down here on the original case, and as I got the hot air gun on it, loads of boiling water and steam started to appear. So you can tell how they don't half hold water. Now on mine, this is an interesting wheeze. If you're doing a centerboard case replacement, you might want to consider doing this. Rather than just reinforcing the hog in front of the centerboard case and then trying to joint it onto frame 2, I made my case with a proboscis on it. And that is my reinforcing for the mast step. The mast is going to sit there. The downside of this, it means you do have to cut through frame 2 where it comes in at this point. But you'll see in a minute how we did that and reinforced it. I think it worked really well. If I can click it over. Oh, these are some pictures of hull repairs. Oh, I know what this is about. Yes, this was how we put the case back in. This again is number 2. Right. What we did to get the case securely back into the boat, having got all the glue on it, these lengths of studding with a pad on one end and a pad on the other end. This is the center one. It's going to go through there, and I'll tell you about the importance of that item in a minute. We drop the stud through and put the centerboard up over the studs, and then put these on with screws and washers, and then use these literally to clamp the centerboard up into its slot. And at the same time, we put a batten from the top of the board to each side of the boat to make sure that the centerboard was vertical, because you don't want a boat with a center case leaning over. The importance of the packing tape is that that does not stick to epoxy adhesive in any way at all. So these chaps, once we came to do the actual fit, we bound these up with parcel tape. Then there was no risk that you could inadvertently have got some epoxy under one of these and glued it into the bottom of your boat, because even the smallest smidge of West epoxy will glue a piece of wood to another piece of wood like you wouldn't believe. So it's really well worth having loads of that stuff to make sure that things that you don't want stuck together are embalmed in it before you start. Those are some of the hull patches about to go in. I think that was where the baler was, actually, that one that we saw earlier. And yeah, there we are. Things are tightened up. I think there's some parcel tape somewhere around there. There certainly should be, but it's showing there anyway. There wasn't too much risk actually getting epoxy on this surface, because all the epoxy is down inside the slot. But it worked really well. It was a good way of doing it, because otherwise you're struggling to think, how do I, with the boat upside down, how am I going to get the centerboard case to sit right? There it is.
To get the joint where the centerboard case meets the hull, it's a slightly odd thing down there, isn't it? It's just in the slot. We ended up with a gloved finger just smearing epoxy into the little gaps and making it all good, just with a finger.
Yeah, there's the batten we put across with a sort of bit of locating wood on it. That's to keep the centerboard case straight. A very interesting thing we discovered when we came to put the thwart back in was that the centerboard case hadn't been straight originally. Couldn't believe it, because we were going to use the same screw holes and tidy things up, and lo and behold, they didn't line up. And I thought, oh my God, something's gone wrong. I put the centerboard case in on the lean, oh, hell's teeth, it's this wonderful boat. I've gone and wrecked it. And then we measured, and the centerboard case was sitting dead upright. We eyed it up and everything. No, it's absolutely straight. And then we realized it hadn't been in straight originally. And then we measured the mast step, because that didn't look right, because that wasn't lining up properly with my refitted centerboard case. I thought, and then I measured the mast in the deck. This is with the gate in the deck, and then we measured the gate position, and it's actually not in the middle. There's a dimension. The dimensions each side of the gate across the deck are different, so you can tell that number 2 was pretty much thrown together as a bit of an experiment that nobody expected to be a success.
But it's not only number 2. My boat, which was originally dates from 1972, is 10 millimeters longer along the starboard side than it is along the port side, which probably explains why I'm really wizard on port tack.
So yeah, there's lots of tolerance, in other words. Let's see if I can just click this on. There we go. That's the finished job on number 2. Case back in, all looking really nice and tidy now on the bottom. We did replicate these rather strange things. They fell apart. We're pretty sure they were retrofit anyway. They were never original, and they were really crudely made. But somebody got worried about the frames no longer meeting or attaching properly to the centerboard case, and they've made some pretty lumpy saddle things to go around there. You might have seen them in the early pictures. But we decided to replace those, and we used plywood, so they're quite obviously a modern insertion, and we weren't ashamed of those. In fact, when the floorboards are in, you hardly see them anyway. And all the seat rails back in, of course, you've got no indication at all that we cut that thwart. But if you look very carefully here, you'll see that my careful penneting of the screw holes, they're not in the middle. They don't line up the center of the case. But if you measure from there over to that side and there over to that side, they're different measurements. So the boat's a bit wonky all around, really. And once everything's painted inside, you can't see all our patches and things. They're all hidden. It was painted inside. I say originally, it was painted inside when we received it. So whether the original builders painted it inside, I sort of doubt. I think probably it wasn't, but we decided that we would carry on with that. It does hide a multitude of sins. Interestingly, you can see that the plywood used on these early boats was nothing wildly exciting. It's just marine plywood of the day, held down with lots and lots and lots of pins. And that was my boat with the centerboard case back in, which looked a lot better once it was back than it did in the raw, so to speak, because they look a bit crude really with this reinforcing and just being a bit of old plywood sort of stuff. But actually, it looks quite, it looks quite pretty now. It's back in the boat, and I think there might be a picture of my mast. Yes, there we are. That's how I did the mast step. I was showing you, there's the proboscis. I put a platform on here, and in fact, I didn't even buy a new plug for the end of my mast. I cut the mast short, and I made this little arrangement, which still takes a square foot, and you've got adjustment on it as well. And it seems to be, you know, within the spirit of the rules. Nobody's stopped me from racing with it like that yet, but David probably hasn't seen it properly yet. He's here today studying it now, probably very carefully. Because I had to cut frame 2 to let this go through. This platform does a really good job because it actually fixes frame 2 back to the centerboard case. And then, because I've always been very concerned that GP14s seem to have an awful lot of centerboard case in front of the thwart, I put a stiffening gusset in as well there with a hole in it to let my lead lines go back, and that's worked really well. You cannot wobble this end of the centerboard case at all, whereas on most series 1s, if you get hold of them, or if your crew is fairly heavy and is hiking out and decides to give it a good shove with his foot just there, you push this, that will actually move. The thwart's so far back, there's a hell of a lot of unsupported length on the centerboard case. So that was my little special trick just to sort it out. And there we are, back to the finished boat. So I think that concludes the formal part of the talk. We're open to take
You're not going to reveal why you have 2 white stripes down the middle of your foredeck, Steve, are you?
That's what you call a design opportunity arose when we got the decks on, didn't it, Hugh? We were being so
nothing
careful.
to do with the fact that the 2 sides were not quite even, and we thought maybe putting a wider stripe in down the middle would help us conceal the shoddy workmanship. Nothing to do with that at all. We just thought 2 white stripes would look nice, didn't we, Steve?
We did. I remember it was the morning after we glued the 2 deck halves on, and we put so much pressure and bits of wood down here strutted off the ceiling, you couldn't actually see the joint to check it. And I came the morning after to Hugh's workshop, with Hugh wringing his hands saying, "Steve, I've just taken the struts away. Look, they don't line up. Something's gone wrong. Something must have moved." And there was quite a big difference between the edge of this panel and the edge of this panel. So we decided the best thing to do is make a wide interface and just feather it across. And it looks really nice. It gave us the opportunity to do this, and I think it's actually a big improvement. I think it looks nicer actually. But the center, if you run your hand over it, the center is actually there. You can feel it rise, and then it starts to fall off away on this side. But nobody can see that.
But you're not to tell anyone any of that.
No, that's a secret. That's a trade
That's a
secret.
secret.
But it does look really pretty, I think. We were very, very, very proud of those decks. And all this white wood here, which you put in, that was done. They were done a bit wider to conceal all the old screw fixing points that were in the thwart, because that's a second-hand thwart. It isn't actually the thwart from this boat. Actually, it's one we took from another boat, and it had lots of old screw holes in from all manner of fixtures and fittings. But by putting in 2 wide strips of maple, we lost all those. So that was quite nice. Right, questions. I haven't been looking at. I don't know if you know what the chat looks like, Hugh.
We've comments from Oliver telling us, adding extra bits of information, which is very useful. Thank you, Oliver. And then we have a question from Jill Best. I've got a 1963 boat. Will she have been glued with Cascamite? I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Cascamite is when you come across it 50 years on, is very dry and flaky, and in Steve's phrase, has lost its virtue.
Yes. But I mean, don't panic too much, because I mean, this boat and Hugh's and number 2, most of the floor on those and certainly the sides are still held together with Cascamite, as are the frames. So it's not going to implode or explode. But if you are doing any substantial work like redecking, that will stiffen the whole of the top of the boat up for a start, but also take the opportunity to clean away down the sides of the frames and such like, and just put a seam of epoxy, West epoxy adhesive down the side of the frames where you can reach it. That will not do any harm at all and will probably do an awful lot of good.
And this boat is now actively raced in wild weather and big seas, isn't it, Steve? So
yes.
was until the pandemic anyway.
Yeah. This was just before I went to Barbados for the Worlds, actually, this picture, where we didn't do very well, but somebody did come up to me and try and insist that this was a Duffin boat. And I said, no, I did it myself. Are you sure? Oh, yes. No, it's a Duffin. No, all right, it's a Duffin. You have your own way. But no, I felt really proud of that.
Somebody's asking, did you replace the deck in all cases, or did you have to match colours between old and new? No, in both of the 3 boats we've been talking about, 2 of them we replaced the decks, and in each case, complete replacement of decks, which also involved redoing the coamings and the rubbing strips. On number 2, Pimpernel, we didn't replace the deck. We wondered about it, and then we thought, no, the idea here is just to restore it to something like original. We're not sure. We think, I can't remember what conclusion we came to. Was the deck original or not?
We decided it was in the end. It was a little bit unclear because the present owner suggested to me that the deck had been replaced, but I'm sure he was getting confused. The present owner who gifted it to the association 3 or 4 years ago, they had pushed it into their barn in about 1967 when they bought a new boat. So it had lain unused for a very long time. And John's recollections do seem a bit hazy in some respects, but I'm now certain that it has its original deck on it. The only thing that was done is that the coaming around here on number 2 has been planed off flat. That would, without doubt, that would have been raised up to the normal, like, what is it, 1/4 of an inch? Oliver will tell us, 1/8 of an inch raise on that coaming. Well, number 2, that's gone, so somebody's planed it off. And the other thing they've done, which is quite interesting actually, I probably have to go back in the pictures. I might just do that. Let me just pop back a couple. See, it's a bit interesting if you're into this sort of stuff. There we are. You can see that the coaming, it is the correct very thin coaming. But if you look, it's held on with masses and masses and masses of brass screws. And you'd think to yourself, or I thought to myself, why would anybody put brass screws in a coaming at that interval? And then I was looking at another old boat, which unfortunately was gone, far too far gone to be restored. It was near here, actually. And of course, they were brass pins originally, and the wretched brass pins come out gradually and then tear your back of your legs to bits. So what somebody has done, wherever there was a pin, they put a screw. Hence, the rather inoffensive little pins, which you never saw, have all got great big screws in now. But I think it just seems absolutely bonkers to have screws at those centres to hold the coaming on. But there you go. And as I say, when that was done, I think that's when they then planed it off, I think.
Can I go to we've got a few questions piling up here. Curly Morris says that his first boat was glued with aerolite. What's aerolite? I don't know.
Yeah, I remember aerolite, and I don't know whether aerolite superseded Cascamite or was alongside Cascamite. Curly may know, Oliver may know, and I don't know whether one was better than the other. Yeah.
Anyway,
I was given some aerolite.
I think at this stage it's a historical interest only, probably at this stage, isn't it? Whether there's a difference between them, because you're not going to be using either of them now.
I doubt it. You can still buy Cascamite, actually. This is still.
Can I dip in on that question about aerolite and Cascamite? I was just typing chat on the same topic actually. They ran alongside each other. Aerolite was the choice of the professionals and was recommended by Bell Woodworking with their kits. And it was an excellent glue in professional hands, but many amateurs found it difficult to manage the hardener. There were a number of difficulties with the hardener. So many amateurs preferred Cascamite. And that turned out to have only a relatively short lifespan, but we didn't know that at the time.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
certainly, if you don't, put too much pressure on an old Cascamite joint, it seems to be fine. But if it's put under real stress, it just hasn't got anything to make it. The stiction's gone. If you're doing replacement parts, of course, that's quite good.
Yeah, we've got a pile up of questions.
It also tends sometimes to degrade if it gets wet, long-term wet.
Right.
Yeah. Can I go to the pile up of questions?
Yes.
Questions
please.
and comments. Somebody says 1950s, 60s wood was good, but the glue was rubbish, and now it's the other way around. I think it's still possible to get good wood, but and certainly good plywood. Again, we'll get a plug to Robbins of Bristol. But in general, I think it's probably quite a good comment that we've now got good glues and rubbish wood. And it was the other way around 50, 60 years ago. Somebody says, amazed at the amount of solid timber contained compared to my new build. Yes, they were designed for solid mahogany frames, solid mahogany transom, solid mahogany seats. Well, they'd still be solid mahogany new ones, I guess. Yes, they're much more solid wood objects than new current designs of GP14. Question about removing paint. Seems to be several layers on the outside of my hull. I think the total weight of paint on your boat was 9 kilograms, wasn't it, Steve?
Something like that. It was a lot of weight in the paint.
We took it off and you get better and better and better at it the more you do it. Nitromore's waste of time. We used a heat gun and a scraper, and the scraper has to be one with a really sharp blade. What's it called? Is it a tungsten blade or something?
I think one of the shots has got a picture of the scraper sitting on the hull, actually.
Oh, there is one actually, isn't there? See if you can find it. But it's a proper sharp bladed scraper.
Tungsten carbide blade you want?
That's the one. Thank you.
That's the one, yeah.
And with application of a heat gun and a scraper, I think it might have been one of my slides, Steve.
Yeah, I think it was.
We found that we got quite good at it. I can't remember the exact figures, but on my boat, I think I did one side of the boat first, then the other side. I think I took the paint off the first side. It took me about 3 weeks. And the second side took me about 3 hours. It's just a matter of having a go at it, but chemicals, virtually no use. It's heat. What did we use to replace the rubbing strake? Yes, there's a story. We did the same thing, didn't we, Steve? Yes, we actually sort of built it up in layers from the inside outwards, screwing them in and then put a strip along, screw it in and then take the screws out and put the next layer on and so forth. And then quite a lot of careful shaping.
Yeah, I mean, this is the nice part to do, because if you've got a nicely routed edge along the edge of the deck, nice and vertical, it was really easy because I went to, it was Robin supplied everything for this. I can't just remember, but anyway, we got these two pieces made, supplied to roughly the right square section, planed 4 sides. And then we just, as Hugh said, you put your adhesive on the edge of the hull and you screw you screw the first mahogany one on with just ordinary screws, but then take the screws out after about 12 hours or so. When the epoxy has achieved that initial set, you then whip the screws out before they're grabbed too hard by the glue. That's really important. Don't forget them and come back 2 days later and think, I want to try and get those screws out. You won't get them out. So take them out as soon as the initial hardness has happened, about 12 hours, I think it was. And then you can do the same again with the next layer, which in this case was the maple. And you tighten up the screws, put them at quite close centers, and the glue will all squidge out. And then the last layer goes on. And in fact, then when you get to here, if you're doing this little sitting out strip, you then glue an extra bit on for that as well. The last piece, we were more careful with the screws because we we're going to have to fill where the screws had been, and we didn't want to have lots of ugly filler. So that one I took a lot more trouble with the screwing. Still took the screws out, but I was careful to make sure that you know, that I didn't scar the wood unduly when I was screwing in. And then once everything's nice and hard and the screws are all gone, set to with sandpaper and just work away gently. Well, not gently, actually, to start with, we're being fairly brutal, bringing this down, bring it down, then go to a lighter paper. I don't think I used a plane on it at all. I think I was able to fare it all in by sanding, even around here. And it's really lovely to start to do it because it just comes to life. You know, all the squidgy glue goes, and then you start to get into the wood, and the shape starts to come. And you can do it by eye perfectly well. I thought it would be difficult, but actually it wasn't.
It doesn't, as in a lot of these things, it doesn't have to be straight or square or precise or accurate. It has to look straight, square, precise, and accurate.
Yeah.
We've just passed the hour mark, and I think, well, I don't think, I've just been told that it's time to wrap up. So I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone, for at least appearing to listen. Thank you, Steve. I hope you've got the general message that it's an awful lot of be brave, give it a go. If it goes wrong, try again. We started this sort of these projects with no particular knowledge, just with a certain amount of gung-ho attitude. Let's give it a go, and that will take you a long way, I think. And you learn as you do it, and you can end up with some quite good results. It's fun. So unless Steve has anything to add, thank you very much, everybody.
If anybody's got other questions, do send us emails and we can answer them. We didn't mention varnishing and painting. That's a bit of another subject, and you may have some questions on that, and we're happy to answer those by email.
And we hope you'll all visit the GP14 stand at the Virtual Dinghy Show, which I haven't really seen myself yet, so I'm going off there now. So thank you very much. We'll wrap it up.
Good.
Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.
Thank you.